Hello, my friend. Welcome to the Money is Emotional podcast. I am your host, Christine Luken. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Dr. Joaquin E. Wallace, a behavioral finance strategist, educator, and author of the Amazon bestselling book, Generational Wealth Begins with Generational Knowledge. Dr. Wallace is the creator of the Financial Genetic Code and developer of the 7-stage generational wealth model, powerful tools that decode inherited financial narratives and reprogram behaviors to build lasting prosperity. As a lecturer at Golden Gate University and Chabot College, Dr. Wallace blends behavioral science, cultural intelligence, and practical strategy to help families, students, and professionals turn financial trauma into a generational legacy. His work bridges academia, community empowerment, and media, making him one of the leading voices in the emerging field of generational wealth psychology. Dr. Wallace, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to being on your show.
Yeah. Well, let's start with your story. You've built your life's work around the intersection of behavioral science and generational wealth. What sparked your passion for this topic, and how did your own financial upbringing shape your mission?
Well, let's start with the last question, how my financial upbringing sparked this mission. I come from a community, a very a marginalized community. My parents worked hard. Obviously, money was something that we didn't speak about in our homes, and it's something that was practiced throughout, our environment. I mean, if you look at it, as you know, money is a topic that is not frequently spoken about. And with that being said, you carry a lot of baggage and you don't know why you're carrying this baggage. And so as I continue with my career, I found myself struggling with the idea of why do I have the relationship I do with money. And being a financial planner and an advisor, you have to know those things. And I always say I was the barber. How you have a barber who cleans everyone up and looks good every day, but I wasn't practicing the same philosophies that I was preaching. And so, why was that? And that was a byproduct of my environment, my internal, external ecosystem. So once I was able to discover that in conversation with many of my clients, I felt that this process needed to be kind of flushed out. But as you know, it's something that people don't want to talk about, embarrassed to some degree. And to get them to even speak about it is a journey in itself. So I think that's what kind of fueled me to where I'm at today. Overall, obviously, I love what I do in the inner cities with my Welfare to Work program that I established with my nonprofit Project Transition Incorporated many moons ago, 1997. But, I've always had a passion to help my community and be a linchpin within my community itself, be a change agent. And that's kind of what drives me.
Yeah, I love that. Well, you're right. There is so much shame around money. I always like to say that money is like sex. Like, we're supposed to be great at it, and yet no one teaches us about it, and we're not supposed to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I have something to that as well too, because that's so true. It just kind of dovetailing on that. One of the things I've found, and this as well, many of your clients and the clients that I've been able to come in contact with over the years, they're really, when I meet with them, I would say that you would have to become financially naked. And that's something that, that they're not comfortable with doing, especially those that. So many of your close friends who want you to manage your monies, if you will, become their financial advisor, planner, coach, counselor, educator, therapist, whatever the case may be.
A little bit of everything.
They have a hard time becoming financially naked. And with that being said, you're not able to move forward. They'd rather work with someone else that they don't know, versus someone
Mm-hmm.
that they do know who may have, who will have their best interests in mind. But again, that shame, that financial literacy, the shame that we do have becoming financially naked is a real,
Yeah.
real issue that we have to deal with.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's that fear of judgment, and unfortunately, I have encountered many people who have been on the receiving end of judgment from a financial professional at some point in their life, like, "How could you have done that? That was a stupid mistake," and you're just, it's so cringy, you know,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
because that doesn't help.
No, it
So
doesn't.
so you coined the term financial genetic code. Can you explain what that means and how understanding our financial DNA can help us rewrite those inherited money scripts that no longer serve us?
That's a great question. Going through the book itself, creating the model, I'm sure we're going to get to the model itself. But the
Mhm.
financial genetic code basically suggests that each of us has our own unique financial genetic code. Therefore, with that being said, it's virtually impossible to create a financial literacy program specifically as a cookie cutter. And that's what you find oftentimes is that we're lumping everyone in and we're kind of like in a vacuum saying specifically, well, this is a program or these are the exercises or these are theories, these are the counsels, these are the recommendations I'm making to you based upon this. And we
Yeah.
know that everyone has their own unique financial genetic code. And their financial
Mhm.
genetic code is a byproduct of their inherited financial narratives and their encoded financial behaviors. The inherited financial narratives are the why, and the encoded financial behaviors is the action. And that action creates your financial genetic code, which is unique to everyone. Everyone has a different one. Which,
Yeah.
from that perspective, then you have your traumas and you have your anxieties that you bring to the table, good, bad, or indifferent. Many people believe that, okay, well, I have a financial genetic code. Well, first and foremost, they never heard the term. So that's a great thing.
Yeah.
We created a term now that will be used forever, right? So that's a great term. But for the most part, once they understand it, they say, oh my God, I never really realized that I do have a financial genetic code, which is different. You
Mhm.
can have two people in the same home, your husband and you have
Oh,
two
yeah.
separate financial genetic codes. And it really does shape basically who you are. And you mentioned earlier about how financial shaming comes into play. Well, think of it this way. What's rational to you may be irrational to me, but why is it rational to you? Well, your unique financial genetic code will be able to determine that. And once I'm able to
Yeah.
understand that, I can be better, I can serve you better based upon me understanding your unique financial genetic code.
Yeah. No, I love that because you do see, different financial planners or financial gurus who have their seven-step formula or their whatever framework. And you're right, you can't just shove everybody into the same cookie cutter, even if their net worth is the same or their income is the same, because like you said, their genetic code, their financial genetic code can be completely different because they were raised in different environments. Their parents handled money differently. Um, and it's funny because sometimes I will ask my clients, what did your parents teach you about money? And they'll say nothing. And I'll say, they might not have explicitly taught you something, but they implicitly taught you something based off of the things they said about money, the things they did with money, the situations that you witnessed as a kid. Like, you were taught about money, whether your parents actually sat down and said anything to you about money.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at it, throughout the book, we mentioned the term financial passengers. All of us in
Mm,
terms of when you're growing up in a home, you are the passenger of the driver, which is your parents. And what
yeah.
you find eventually, you're going to be given the keys to the car. And when you get the
Mm,
keys to the car, now you are now the driver. And so either you're going to drive the same way that your parents drove, or if you didn't like how they drove, They may have road rage at some point. Say, well, I don't want to do that. I'm going to do things a little different. Well, that's the same thing when you look at financial passengers, that you are the passenger and your parents are the drivers. And that's where we get our first, kind of idea of how to manage money. As I say in the book, your parents are your first financial fiduciaries. Those are the
Yeah.
individuals. And unbeknownst to them, they're only teaching you what they know. And
Right.
many of the information or the education that we received in surrounding money was unsolicited. It may have come from your
Right.
parents, uncle, auntie, cousin, friend, neighbor. You could be your mechanic. It could be
Yeah.
anybody.
Your pastor,
Right. I mean, it could be anyone giving you information, but was unsolicited. It was information
Right.
that was given to you without your permission, and you carry that on, which does create your financial genetic code.
Hmm. Yeah. And if you don't stop to examine that and decide, is this serving me or not? I'm just like going with this metaphor of like being on a financial road trip, and like you're picking up this emotional money baggage as you go on this trip, right? And do you ever open it up and decide, do I still want to be dragging the suitcase around with me with all this stuff inside?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, at some point you start realizing, well, what my parents taught me may not have been, what I need today. But again, there was information that was given to you without your permission. So you
Yeah.
continue to carry this on. We're talking about generations of this. So your
Yeah.
parents learn from their parents learn from their parents, and it's a reason why we have this type of relationship with money. And so what I find today, as you know, this genre is becoming very oversaturated and a fragmented genre. The barriers
Hmm.
to entry are low. If I'm looking at it from a marketing product life cycle, I will believe we're at
Yeah.
a maturity state, maybe at a decline as well too, because you have so much information coming in nowadays. And so now you have to make sense. Okay, what do I want to listen to? What do I not want to listen to? One area we know, which is great, is that there's a lot of information you can get at your fingertips. That's great, but it may not be the best information. But
True.
again, right, it goes back to everyone's teaching financial literacy through a vacuum, saying basically this is
Hmm.
what we all need to do without taking into the account, well, what's that person's financial genetic code? And I'll go a step further. As as one of the 5 financial professionals, as I elaborate in my book, you have to know your own personal financial genetic code, because
Yeah.
oftentimes we can transfer our own financial genetic code to our clients. Therefore, that's where the mistrust comes in. When I have one thing, we talk about scar tissue narrative, one of the inherited narratives in the book itself. But all of these do have serious implications on who you are and how you react in your relationship with money.
Yeah. So, your 7-stage generational wealth model is such a powerful framework. Would you walk us through the stages briefly and share how someone might begin their journey through the model, even if they don't come from wealth?
It's a great question. Do you have an hour and a half to go through the model? I'll give you
That's why I said a
okay.
brief.
I'll give you the clip notes to it all. So,
Okay.
so the model is based upon 3 phases of our lives: the past, present, and the future. So stages 1 is our internal and external ecosystem, which focuses on walls in and walls out. Stage 2 is our financial genetic code, which focuses upon both financial anxiety and trauma. So that's your past. Stage
Mm,
3 is financial healing. This is where we have the opportunity to reprogram our financial genetic code, which is a byproduct of stages 2 and 1. Now, stage 3 is the present. Stage 4 is the present as well. That's financial edification, focusing on financial literacy and financial inclusion, which is so
mm,
important. Stage
yeah,
5 is the future. That's financial well-being. This is where we all are trying to strive towards. This is our
right.
soft landing. Financial health is financial wealth. Stage 6 of the model is our generational knowledge. Stage 6, generational knowledge. This is where we have the opportunity to transfer the knowledge required to get to stage 7, which is creating your financial footprints to generational wealth. I firmly believe that we need to put more emphasis on generational knowledge, because we
Yeah.
know, as the numbers suggest, if you're a first generation individual, 10% of the assets that you've accumulated will reach your grandchildren. That's what the numbers suggest. And
Wow.
30% to your immediate children. Why is
Mm.
that? Generational knowledge. We spend so much time accumulating assets, we spend less time in terms of the knowledge. And the knowledge can be life insurance, long-term care, estate planning, irrevocable and revocable trust, power of attorneys. All of those are so important to transfer your wealth successfully. But we
Mm-hmm.
don't do that culturally. We don't do that. In a society, we don't do that. So that's the model itself, broken into 3 phases. And the great thing about the model is that you can go clockwise and you can go counterclockwise. Your present is where your feet are at that time. You may be at stage 5, and I've met many clients that are stage 5 financial well-being, but something that can happen that can immediately take you back to your stage 1 and stage 2. And if you look at it
Mm.
today, what's going on with the government, with the SNAP benefits and things of that nature, you see a lot of individuals with that financial anxiety, that
Yeah.
trauma that has come into play, that's reared its ugly heads, that may be in stage 4, right? Working hard, doing the thing, living the American dream, but many of them are on SNAP benefits, if you will. So now they go right back to that stage 1 and 2, and they recall those episodes in their lives. If they came from scarcity of resources, now they're like, okay, I don't want to go back to that, but it quickly goes back to that, kind of reminds them where they came from.
Yeah. Well, and even if they're not using those benefits now, if they grew up on them,
Absolutely.
right? All of a sudden that's gonna trigger that memory. So I love this model, and what I find is that a lot of people are so focused on getting the financial literacy today so that they can build the generational wealth for tomorrow, but they're never going back and looking at the past. And when they don't do that, in my observation, and I've seen this with my clients, when we don't address those things from the past, they always come back to haunt us.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's what I'm saying earlier, is that although you may be in stage 4, something may have happened that will
Mm.
take you back to that stage 1. Like you say, you may have come from a situation where you may have been on government subsidies, if you will. But, also too, you have people who are very successful also
Mhm.
that has financial trauma and anxieties. Their financial genetic code can be warped, if you will. And so,
Yeah.
although they have success, they do have a distinctive financial genetic code. And you
Mhm.
find it. I mean, you have people that are successful, financial genetic code. You have people that aren't successful, financial genetic codes, right? I mean, everyone has a unique code itself. And I think that, once you're able to identify and know what those are, it will help you move forward. And I think that's so important in this business that we're in today.
Yeah, exactly. It is, like once you heal the root of those behaviors, then the the surface actions are much easier to take. When like I'm trying to get a client out of debt, we don't just talk about here's the plan to get out of debt. I need to learn about their relationship with debt and their relationship with money so that I can understand what allowed them to get in this cycle to begin with, right? Because then once we uncover those things and start healing those things, that part of their financial DNA, then the external piece of working the plan to pay off the debt becomes so much easier. There's so much less resistance to that once you've dealt with those root issues.
And those are conversations that many don't want to have. And again, it goes back to what we said earlier, becoming financially naked. Are you going to allow yourself to be seen as you are? And if you're able to do that, then that's the first step. But we know that's the most challenging step, right? Because just to admit, to sit down in front of someone and say, okay, let me look at your numbers, look at your spreadsheet, and this is what's going on. And immediately they can become defensive. After your first meeting, they may not come back simply because they're embarrassed. And that's where the financial literacy and the financial shaming comes into play. And so, and also I firmly believe that the way we're teaching financial literacy is of a linear process, not of a holistic process. Linear is infinite, right? It goes on forever, but at the end of the day, you're not solving the problem. I simply say in the book that we're putting a Band-Aid on a much broader problem. It's a quick fix today, but in the long run, it's not the most sustainable way of creating those relationships in terms of ascertaining generational wealth.
Yeah. Well, I'd love for you to unpack your walls in and walls out concept. What does this mean in terms of protecting generational wealth, both emotionally and structurally?
So think of it this way. Walls in is everything that you learn inside of the home. That's all those conversations, those nonverbal conversations you spoke about earlier. When many of your clients, and you ask the question and say, "Well, they haven't taught me anything about money." No, you've learned a lot about money. You're witnessing it in front of you. You are a participant in it without you even knowing you are. And so once you're able to first identify, here's my walls in, here's everything that I've learned, I need to unpack that. Here is my inherited financial narratives. I need to identify that. That's so important. Once I'm able to identify that and know the walls in, now let's move the walls out. Because as we know, walls out can be just as destructive as walls in. Soon as I walk outside the door, what do I see? It could be systemic. It can be safety. It could be education. It could be health, fear of missing out. Maslow's 5 hierarchy of needs come into play as well. All of these factors shape who you are. So at the end of the day, I have my walls out and my walls in. Well, the question is, what is more important? What has the biggest impact on you? And you can see people when they're successful, walls out may be the driving factor for them, right? Showing their wealth, if you will, letting everyone know that, hey, I've made it. That could be the walls out because in their environment, that was important. But then you see some individuals who are successful, they don't want anyone to know that they're successful. You could be sitting next to someone and they could be a millionaire and you don't even know because their walls out specifically said, in my community where I grew up, they may have seen how it can affect them, other people that they know, and say, well, I don't want that to be me. I'd rather be in the background. So that's important, right? Walls in and walls out. Both of those create your financial genetic code. And that was one of the most profound things that came out of the whole book itself in my process is that walls in and walls out, everything that I've learned, good, bad, or indifferent. And as you mentioned earlier, you may have some successful clients that you're sitting in front of where they're meeting with you. So think about that. They're successful, but they're meeting with you. Something is going on. Their walls in. Yeah. And maybe their walls out, how they're being viewed, what success means to them, which can affect how they manage wealth. When you meet with your clients, that's why stage 5 is so important. You have to understand that everyone has a different endpoint. Everyone has a different idea of what financial health is to them. What do they want at the end of the day? And it's important when you have couples is to know exactly, what do you want when you retire and what do you want when you retire? Because sometimes they're on 2 different islands. right? It's like,
It's
well,
true.
this is what I want, and this is what I want. Well, we never talked about that. So they're going about it totally different, right?
Yeah.
Because their stage 5, their financial well-being is so different. But it comes back to their stage 1, their inherited financial narratives and coded financial behaviors, their financial genetic code, because now it's different. And once you're able to
Yeah.
determine, okay, this is what I want, this is what you want, can we come to an agreement? Can we do
Yeah.
this? Yes or no? Well, maybe, I want to live on a boat. Well, I don't want to live on a boat. Well, maybe we'll live on a boat half-time, part-time. Okay, all right. Well, that may be the case. I want to travel. I don't want to travel. Well, maybe we'll travel, twice a year, when you retire.
Hmm.
These are the things that those discussions typically aren't had. And as you know,
Yeah.
with couples, money can be a divisive factor. We know that.
Yeah.
Right,
It can be.
with marriages, with friendships, definitely with friendships, business partnerships, money can be divisive because you have 2 or 3 or 4 people with different financial genetic codes, and so they manage money totally different. Who you are, if you're in business, I'm speaking of, who you are as a person outside of business is the same person you're going to be when you have a business. Right.
Yep.
There is
It's
no
true.
separation of the two. I mean, if you're
Yep.
one way, you're going to be the same way. And so that's why you can have some dysfunction, if you will, within businesses itself, as the same you can have with friendship and marriages. How many people we know that have lost friendships due to money? More than we can count.
Yeah, especially if you lend to people money, right?
Yeah. So I have a theory on that one. I've learned.
That's a surefire way.
That's
No,
a surefire way.
not always.
Not always. But my theory is you never
Uh.
loan money to someone if you can't afford it.
Dare to enter the Wealthy Woman Book Club, where answers exist to forbidden questions, where women of all ages and income secretly gather, where knowledge is shared, where possibilities are explored, where women claim their power. Dare to stay a spell in the Wealthy Woman Book Club. In this place, we lift each other up. In this place, we start dreaming again. In this place, we see financial miracles. In this place, we grow through the glory and the failure. In this place, we step into a new identity. Dare to champion the Wealthy Woman Book Club. We're creating a future where women are financially empowered across the globe. We're creating a future where our daughters stand on equal financial footing with our sons. We're creating a future where we purchase with our principles rather than price tags. We're creating a future where we use the power of money for the benefit of people and the planet. Welcome to the Wealthy Woman Book Club. Dare to come in, woman. Come in. Join us at wealthywomanbookclub.com.
%.
Right?
Yeah.
If I
If they
don't
never
expect
paid
it
you back, and
it-
you would still be okay, and you wouldn't
absolutely.
be upset. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep,
Absolutely.
that is mine as well. Well, and I do think it's important, especially when we look at the walls out, that, there are communities that have been at a disadvantage when it comes to money. And, when especially we talk about couples a lot, when you've got someone who's come from a very middle class background and their parents taught them the basics about money, and then you've got someone who was raised in poverty and in lack, that those two things can clash. So, in my book, Money is Emotional, I talk about my ex-fiance, who fortunately I did not marry, but, his family came from the trailer park. And there was a lot of dysfunction around money that it really didn't click in for me until after I left him and started on my own healing journey. But, there was like this unwritten, unconscious belief that you don't get too successful, because otherwise, who do you think you are? Like, you're too good for us. And I'll give you an example of this was, when my ex-fiance and we went to Christmas dinner at his uncle's trailer. He had just gotten a job not too long ago for a security system place, and he had a company truck. And so when we went to Christmas dinner in the company truck, his uncle said to him, "Oh, look at you, Mr. Big Shot. You got a company truck. Pretty soon you're going to be too good to come visit us in the trailer park." It wasn't even 2 months before he got a DUI, wrecked that truck, and lost his job. But that was the unconscious, narrative in that community is, you don't do better than your family. If you don't get too big for your britches, was kind of the saying. And so, because I think there is some sense of, if you get successful, you're leaving us behind.
That's interesting because, that's when you talk about walls in, walls out, that's that learned helplessness and self-sabotage that we speak about. And, again, unknowingly, we go through these episodes without knowing exactly why. And I found it very prominent during my Welfare to Work program that we have, is that we'll have clients that go through the program and they do extremely well, but they weren't used to doing well. And so they would just self-sabotage. They wouldn't show up. They would lose their jobs, if you will, because they're not comfortable. And it goes back to what you're saying, is that oftentimes and not just the crabs in the barrel theory, if you will, but oftentimes and not, when you're successful, then those around you feel like, well, you're leaving us. And then that's the walls out. Because at the same time, you want to have success, but you don't want to feel like you're leaving everyone. And that's why you find people who made it from marginalized communities, they keeping it real. I want to still stay connected to the community, if you will. I'm still going to be who I am. I'm not going to change who I am. But in essence, that's the wrong thing to do, because you want to be that role model to say, listen, you can rise above, you can do these things. And we know that the culturally, it can be draining, but at the same time, you have to be able to move forward, because then it's a perpetual cycle that your family are permeating in. And you see it so much, especially in marginalized communities, especially with those who've made it athletically, in terms of entertainment, things of that nature. They're still pulled in. It's like the mafia, right? I'm trying to leave, they keep pulling me back in, right? It's one of those situations where, you can't really leave, but you want to leave. But if you do leave, you feel like you lose your credibility. And that's a great example. And that's why, again, you have your learned helplessness and self-sabotage. All of that is in stage one, your internal and external ecosystem, your inherited financial narratives. And in my book, I tabled 20, you've read the book, but it's 20 that I tabled these 20 inherited financial narratives. There are more, 24, 25 in the book, and it may be 150 of them. But at the end of the day, everyone has their own inherited financial narratives, but it's just to bring, just to say, hey, listen, these are some that are prominent. You may have your own that may not be in the book, but they are present.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why it's so important for us to talk about this stuff and to normalize it, because when you're not talking about financial success, when you're not talking about things like saving, investing, insurance, when that feels like a foreign language, then that's when those unhelpful beliefs become entrenched.
And also too, just think that the way that the media is pushing the narrative. The media is pushing two narratives. One is financial literacy and generational wealth. Those are the two narratives that they're pushing. But at the end of the day, think of it this way. if you're not able to successfully get to stage 5, financial well-being, there is no generational wealth, period.
It's true.
Right?
Yeah.
So you have to get there. But the key is, we're speaking of financial literacy, but financial inclusion is so important.
Yeah.
Understanding,
100%.
right? Understanding, what your qualified plans are at work, 401k, Roth 401s, traditional Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs rather, insurances, the type of insurances that they are, long-term care, which is incredible because if you don't have that, that can really reduce the money that nest egg that you do have because you have to pay for your own self-insured, so to speak. Disability insurance, so important. You're your own, you have your own business, you need to have disability insurance, and or when you're at work, you need to have disability insurance. The simple thing like property and casualty insurance, so important. So many people are uninsured, underinsured, so to speak. So that can affect you as well too. And so inclusion is so important. Literacy is a small piece of the puzzle, but for the most part, inclusion is important, but you have to be able to get through your stage 1 and stage 2 to even participate. You have to have the healing because many of us, as you know, don't participate in many of our retirement plans, qualified plans, investment opportunities because we're carrying this baggage, this scar tissue narrative that that's been given to us and we've seen and witnessed, so to speak, that does not allow us to trust the system, trust the process, if you will. Rich is transactional, where wealth is legacy. Which one is more sexier? Obviously, rich, but it's transactional. It's fleeting.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think there's also like this love-hate relationship with money. It's like we want more money, and yet when we turn on the media, we see quote unquote rich people demonized, right? So you've got this like, well, I want to make more money, but I don't want to be like that rich person.
And that's the walls out, right? That's the walls out. It's internal, external ecosystem. I don't want to be like that. You don't want to make a lot of money. It's like when I used to talk to my clients about investing, they say, I want to make the most money that I want to make a lot of money, but I want to take the least amount of risk. I mean, so that's going to be, that's virtually impossible, right? You got to have some risk involved, right? Become risk averse. I want to make all the money, but I don't want to have any risk. Well, you know what? You're going to go broke safely, as I say. And so you have
that's a good way to put it.
You have to stick with your toe in the water, if you will, if you want to achieve in terms of growth, appreciation. You don't have to put it all in there, but you're going to have to take some level of risk to achieve what you want.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that can be hard when you've come from a place where you lacked financial safety, because I've seen that with my husband. His mom and stepdad were spenders. They spent money today and they worried about it tomorrow, and of course they fought a lot in the meantime. And so for him, it's like he needs an emergency fund for the emergency fund because that makes him feel safe. But just understanding that about your partner is important.
Oh, that's huge. I mean, and so again, when you look at relationships, oftentimes you don't know that. You have financial infidelity going on within the home. So
right.
There's a lot of stuff that goes on that really we don't know about until it's too late. And so, you're talking about loss aversion, when we put more emphasis on the loss versus the gain. We have that in terms of prospect theory. All of these things are so important. We have heretics where we just have mental shortcuts. I don't want to do the research, but, it sounds good. I'll do that. The herd mentality, if you will.
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of that going on as well. But, what's important is that you do recognize that. And what I've done in the book, as you highlighted earlier before we came on, is that each of the chapters have questions, which allows you to go through the questions, answer the questions, and then you can give yourself a self-assessment. I had a conversation. It was interesting. And I said to the individual, what this book allows you to do, it allows you to get financially naked in your own home. Therefore, you don't have to worry about doing it in public and or in front of an advisor. It allows you to get
Yeah.
financially naked at home first. Then once you get comfortable, you can say, okay, I'm exposed, but I do now know my inherited financial narratives. I know my financial genetic code. I know the things that I need to do. I'm more apt now to listen because I do see that there's a shortfall on my end as well as within our family itself.
Yeah. Well, and I love that your book is a good resource for that. But let's also talk a little bit about financial trauma. How does someone know if it's not just a faulty narrative, that it is indeed financial trauma, and maybe that they do need to get a counselor involved or someone else? Because as you know, a lot of times with that financial trauma, it's not just about the money, it's also about self-worth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think of it this way. Your trauma is going to be tied to just your reaction, your behavior.
Mhm.
And it could be anything. It could be the fact that you mentioned earlier, I don't want to invest in this. Why is that? Well, I have this trauma associated with this. Maybe you grew up in a
Mhm.
scarcity of resources. That's definitely trauma. Maybe what happened
Yeah.
with the government recently, that's definitely trauma because that's going to bring back those financial flashpoints that you had in your life. You're going to quickly recall and go back and regurgitate this information. And then you have less
Mhm.
trust. Think about that.
Right.
So at some point, you start believing that, okay, I've done X, Y, and Z. This has happened. This wrench has been thrown in this plan, and now immediately going to go back to the way it was. And we always
Yeah.
go back to the way it was versus saying that was the way it was, but this is the way it is today. And you have to remove yourself from those narratives again because they were taught to you and given to you without your permission. You can't
Right.
help how you grew up. We know that.
Yep.
I mean, you can't help that. But what you can do is make changes to some degree. And you also have to give yourself what they call realistic expectations. Many of us give ourselves unrealistic expectations. And if we give ourselves consistently unrealistic expectations, that brings the trauma and or the anxieties that come on with that as well too, because they're not realistic. And so again, trauma is everyone has a different level of trauma, high, low, medium,
Yep.
but comes from their financial genetic code. Is based on how you grew up, your environment, whether it's rich, it really doesn't matter. Your financial genetic code, which incorporates your, as I mentioned earlier, your inherited financial narratives, your encoded financial behaviors, which creates your financial genetic code, which creates your anxiety and or your traumas.
Yeah. So for families who are just starting to think generationally, like maybe they've just paid off debt or they've just built a small nest egg, what's the first step that you recommend to shift from financial survival to legacy building?
Again, the first thing is set realistic expectations. And as a
Yeah.
family, you know exactly what you want to do as a family. That's important because again, when you have two different individuals, may have two different ideas on where they want to go. So
Yeah.
those conversations need to be had. And in referring back to my book, the great thing about the book, it allows you individually, you and your spouse or partner can go through the exercises, and then you can determine, okay, here's some financial flashpoints that I have that I didn't know
Mm.
about. I never really talked about that. And it allows you to say, okay, maybe we need to look at getting some counseling. Because as we
Yeah.
know, as you're in the business, I believe there's 5 financial professionals, and I'm going to throw in the 6th one as well too. In the book, I mentioned 5, but now I'm going to throw a 6th one in as well. So the 5 is the financial planner, the advisor, the coach, the therapist, and the educator. Those are the 5. But I'm going to throw in the coach as well, because the coach is important too.
Mhm.
It's important for you to know individually which one of those do you need,
Yeah.
because oftentimes you may think that you need a financial advisor and or a planner, but you have so much therapy that you need to be taken care of. It would not allow you to move forward. And then
Yeah.
you have analysis by paralysis. So no matter what you're talking about, I mean, you're giving some great information. You're sitting them down. You're going through your steps. Oh, this looks great. But then they're going to go back and do the same thing.
Yep.
Right? or they're not going to do anything
Yes.
at all.
Right. Yeah.
Or they're not going to show up for the second meeting. Right?
Yeah.
Because it's the financial shame. So
Mhm.
maybe the first step, instead of saying I need an advisor or a planner, is to first have some counseling.
Yep.
Or
Yeah.
take it a step further. What about education? I believe the reason why you have so many individuals that are following anything and everything that's being said is because they're hearing so much information. But what about becoming educated first? Knowing exactly what these terms mean. Know the different. What's the EFT? What's a mutual fund? What's a stock? What's a closed-end fund? What's an open-end fund? I mean, this is important to know in terms of mutual funds. What's the understanding the financials? Tactical versus systemic. Knowing the market, if you will. These are important. Know the difference between the 5 insurances that you have: term, universal life, variable life, whole life. I mean, those are important, right? These are important pieces to know. Understanding, how to utilize credit. Many people don't understand credit. Right. So understanding, let's think of 100%, 30% of utilization rate, 30%, 35% is here, knowing exactly where the majority of it lies, because then you can attack it properly. Then when I meet with someone like an advisor or planner, I can ask educated questions. And when they are speaking to me, it's not foreign. But before we even get to that, it may be, conversation with yourself. A therapist, sit down and flush some things out. What was your first, one of the questions I have in the book is, what's your first thought of when you think of money? What do you think about? I mean, that's an open-ended question, but that can go down a rabbit hole, right? As we know.
Well, and I think that's why, I don't ever consider myself in competition with any other financial professional, even other financial coaches, because, all of us bring a certain experience, a certain skill set to the people that we are meeting with. And, like you said, sometimes, someone might come to me and I'll say, you know what, you don't need me. You need Dr. Wallace, or maybe you don't need me. Maybe you need a legitimate financial therapist, psychologist, because you need to deal with X, Y, and Z. And so I'm a firm believer of having a large network of other financial professionals around me that I can refer out to, because, each person or couple, they need something different at different stages of their journey. And I always say, as a financial coach, I don't want you to need me forever, but I want clients to need a financial advisor like you, Dr. Wallace. Like, yes, they need you forever.
Well, my job is to teach you how to fish. That's my job. And so eventually, because I tell my clients, eventually I'm not going to be here forever. So I want to position you with enough education, a toolbox that will allow you to move on, when I'm no longer here. I mean, that's the success of it all. I had a question asked. I was on another podcast. They said to me, so Dr. Wallace, when is someone successfully off the model? Do you ever get off the model? And I said, well, when you transition from Earth, when you transition in life, you are
then you're out of the model.
Then you're off the model. But the success of your transition, that's where it lies. Because did you do your due diligence? Did you do your generational knowledge? Did you do the proper transferring? I mean, you may be whatever you believe in. You may be walking around. You may be with your spirit guides, whatever the case may be. You may be looking down. Whatever you believe in, you may be looking back and say, well, Christine, I'm looking at you right now. I'm happy because what I did within my model, I left everything appropriately done. Right? So that's important. That's when you're off the model.
Yep. I love that. Well, Dr. Wallace, you and I could probably talk for about 5 hours together.
No, I think six.
Obviously,
No, I think
obviously we
six.
do not have that much time.
I think it's 6 hours. You're shortchanging yourself here.
Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and these transformational tools for building wealth that lasts beyond a single lifetime. For anyone who wants to dive deeper, please be sure to check out Dr. Wallace's The New Wealth Wave podcast and his book, Generational Wealth Begins with Generational Knowledge, on Amazon. We will link both of those in the show notes. Well, my friend, this is where I leave you today. If you enjoyed this conversation, please leave us a review. It helps others find the Money is Emotional podcast. And if you're not a subscriber yet, what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button and you'll be notified as soon as a new episode drops. Until next time, this is Christine Luken reminding you that you're good enough, you're smart enough, and gosh darn it, people love you, including me. Bye for now.